Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome. We're going to get started. My name is Paul Agresta. I'm the Deputy General Counsel of the Department of Public Service. I'll be the facilitator for today's technical conference. This is the third day, and the purpose of the technical conference for today is solely limited to discussing construction cost estimates. We're going to proceed with each of the four applicants in series. What I would like to do is have a conversation between the trial staff and the applicant. Everybody else can listen in. And the rest of the people in the audience, if you have questions after the applicant and the trial staff have pretty much exhausted their conversation, then we'll take questions from the audience. We have a portable microphone, and it's important that everybody remember that since this is being webcast, if you're not speaking to the microphone, the people that are watching at home won't be able to hear you, and so you have to wait and come up and get a microphone to speak. I'm told that we had, at the first day of the conference, we actually had about 70 people watching on the webcast. I was surprised to hear that. I don't know if we're going to have that many today, but we'll see. Before we begin, does anyone have any procedural matters they would like to raise? Nobody? I have one. Are there representatives from Boundless here? Okay, could you come up to the microphone for a second, or your attorney, one of you? Just a quick question. I have not seen a template coming back from you folks. We got one from everybody else. So is it something I missed, or where does it stand?
We talked to Graham about that yesterday, and we weren't able to get the cost information that you were looking for, and we suggested that we'll let trial staff know when we're able to do that. And I talked to Graham about the potential of having a conference call at some point in the future for you to go through the same process that you're doing with everyone else with respect to our cost information.
Yeah, Paul, all of the EPC suppliers said that they could and would provide the information in the template form rather than the turnkey pricing which they gave us. But our largest single component, the company that was the EPC on that, is being acquired, and they said that that'll be publicly announced early next week, and then they will be able to provide the information.
It was just publicly announced, I think.
It was? Okay. The good news is they're being acquired by somebody bigger, so.
All right. I'm not sure a teleconference format is going to work, and I don't think we're going to reconvene another technical conference. It may be that we have to exchange information by email to all parties back and forth, which is not great. But we sort of made a public commitment that we were going to videocast all of our technical conferences, and the logistics for setting that up, yet again, is very difficult. So I think we're going to have to see what you send in, and then staff will decide if it has any questions, and we'll probably do that through email to all parties.
We think that should be fine, sir. We think that should be fine, Paul, because all of the suppliers have said that they can put the numbers in the format requested.
Okay. And the other parties may have questions as well, which they would be able to communicate by email, and we would expect you to answer them. Okay, that's understood. Okay, so then the agenda, you guys were last on the agenda. I'm assuming then that there's no point in having that discussion today. Okay, that means we all get to go home early, hopefully. So that's good. All right, so then, thank you. Any other procedural matters before we move on? Okay. We're going to begin with North America Transmission. And if you could just begin by describing what information you recently sent in to staff.
Sure. We sent in there were two documents. One was the completed staff worksheets for each of our projects. The first page of that file was an explanation of the methodology of what we did. The other document was a work paper which consists of excerpts from our March 2nd detailed cost filing, cross-referenced back to this spreadsheet. And I can walk through the methodology if you like.
If you could, and in particular, what I'm interested in is the total cost amount at the bottom of each one. Is that the same as it was originally? I mean, there hasn't been any change in the numbers. You're just deciding which bucket they go into. Is that correct?
Well, with the exception of the Knickerbocker to Pleasant Valley, there was a change. There was an error that was found in completing the worksheet, and that was corrected.
Okay, so if you could point that out at some point.
Okay.
What was done? Okay, good. Thank you.
So the methodology was, first we added kind of a hierarchy to the staff template to be able to enable cross-referencing. And then in our March 2nd filing, we had 3 levels of detail for each estimate. There were the summary tables in Section 8. There were the detailed itemized worksheets, per the December 16th order requested detailed assumptions for each estimate. And then there was a third level of detail that we refer to as CAUSE, the construction assumption worksheet. And so we had an estimator, and I should probably say as an initial matter as well that I apologize, the estimator who did this was not able to travel here today. He is watching on the webcast and standing by if there are any questions that come up that require his assistance. He has over 40 years experience in the industry. He started as an apprentice, became a lineman, foreman, supervisor, worked his way up into management. At one point was the chief estimator for a large construction contractor for Hinkles and McCoy. He's estimated hundreds of transmission and substation projects in the region, and has been involved in the construction of dozens of those projects. So his knowledge and experience went into this as we walk through it, and we hope that shows. So maybe kind of going backwards, for Edict of Fraser, the construction assumption worksheet is the second, third, and fourth pages of the work papers. No, it's that second page right there. So this is the detailed construction assumption worksheet to come up with all of the material, labor, and equipment for all of the transmission line projects. So it started with the indirects, and for example, there's a detailed buildup. There's an 11-month construction period assumed for Edict of Fraser. Monthly costs for all the elements that go into setting up the field office and yard. The total is $692,000. And then there's a code, V-7. And so that $692,915 was entered in row V7 on the staff worksheet. So kind of going down, safety and training. There was $190,000 for the safety program for this project, and that was entered in 511G in other on the staff worksheet. Then those were the indirects for the project, and then everything else is direct. The mobilization and demobilization was estimated at 216,000. That was also added with the yards and office in that category. And so the sum of those two items is the total that's in V7. And so if you go to the staff worksheet in V7 indirects, the indirects is in the staff worksheet was station site office laydown yards, and the total is 909,000. And in the notes, we added the cross-reference back that it's from page 67, yards and office, plus page 67, mobilization, demobilization.
So it's your belief then, if following all these references, someone should be able to trace back all your numbers to where they came
Yeah,
from?
so all of the numbers are cross-referenced both in the staff spreadsheet in that column and in the detailed work papers.
And how did you come up with your contingency per percent?
The contingency came from the itemized worksheet, and it was just based on an assessment of the overall project scope and risk. So it's generally, I think, between about 5 and 12% contingency for each of the projects. It varies. So the next page, the second page on the construction assumption worksheet, gets into the really detailed, kind of progresses through each step of construction. So material handling is getting into where there are even more detailed estimation spreadsheets behind this that are proprietary to the estimator, that are based on local union labor rates escalated to year of occurrence per the local labor agreements, equipment where necessary based on an equipment charge rate, and the number of men, the number of hours for each item. So for material handling, receive, haul, and spot structures, each of these is the number of structures times labor and equipment cost to, this is from receiving the material in the yard, shaking it down, storing it, then hauling it out to each location. So that's this portion of the material handling per structure times the total number of structures is the total cost. And that's one of the many items added to 1B3 in the staff worksheet. So there's a large number of construction labor items that are itemized here and totaled up from this construction, from this cost. So the next construction stage is civil. This is the estimated amount of clearing. It varies. Edict of Fraser had a bit more clearing due to it's an expansion of an existing right-of-way. So a large amount of it, 90% is following an existing right-of-way, but an additional 80 feet expansion from that existing right-of-way. So the assumptions on access were, well, on clearing was that about 40% of the right-of-way would require clearing for the entire 80-foot width. So that was 306 acres of clearing. There's a labor and equipment rate per acre of clearing, and then a total amount of clearing of 7.6 million. And then that translated into 1C3 on the staff worksheet. So the next item is access roads and matting. The assumptions here, and it was described in the application, was there was field work done as well as Google Earth assessment of the existing access. The hope was that The existing Edict of Fraser line has good quality access that could be used for a lot of the construction, and spur roads would be built as needed to access the individual work sites for each tower location and for stringing and so on. The conclusion of the assessment was that that was true for some, but not all of the route, and that about 40%, or about 50% of the total number of roads required for the 79-mile line was about 40 miles of roads. So again, 40 miles of roads needed, $271,000 per mile rate for labor and equipment that's built up elsewhere, which is very similar to the staff assumption on road construction, for a total of $10.8 million. The number used per mile for roads was a function of the both the terrain, well, primarily the terrain and changes in elevation. And so the per mile road value here is lower than what was used for Knickerbocker to Pleasant Valley, where there's a little bit more required for road construction. And then for matting, matting was assumed in all agricultural areas in New York State, as well as all wetland areas. All wet areas that construction activities needed to be conducted in that couldn't be avoided through routing around. So it's about 17 miles of matting, about $1 million per mile, which was similar to the staff assumption, about maybe 10% less, for a total of $17 million of matting for Edict of Fraser. So the next item of work was, again, in civil, was foundation construction. For this project, it's mostly steel monopoles, direct buried where possible, drilled piers for angles and dead ends. So there's amount of excavation required. There were tower drawings that were developed, preliminary foundation designs that were used for estimating the foundation required. The first three items were added just as the direct foundation cost. And then the last item was rock. It was assumed, based on experience, that about 20% rock would be encountered. And you can see the per foundation cost is much higher where there's rock, and about $7 million for rock.
Can I pause you for 1 second?
Sure.
So I was looking back at the staff work papers that we sent around. It looked like the only additions were for roads and matting, so can we stay with those for just a minute?
Sure.
I guess my question is, were the expenses that you have detailed in the template part of that original cost estimate?
Yes, so
Okay.
these pages were in our original March
Okay.
2nd filing and in our original cost estimate.
Okay. Sorry, I just wanted to make that clear for myself and for Ed, so that we're, when we're going back to look at these things, and we're treating this as an opportunity to try to understand everybody's bids, and we're not trying to argue about anything
Sure.
today. We just want to understand what was in them, so that we can properly explain any changes we think would be necessary or appropriate at a later date. So.
Graham, could you or Ed remind us all of the topic areas that staff had made adjustments for the net projects?
Sure. So for NAT, I'm fairly certain, in going back through our work papers, that the only changes that were made were the addition of costs for access roads, matting, and then for certain segments, boring costs, which I'm sure we'll get to as you guys go through. Those are the only additions made for NAT.
Was there a contingency adjustment too, or the plus
I'll
minus
let Ed
adjustment?
answer that.
But I think you added our range of uncertainty. So if it was plus or
Which is
minus
the same
10,
thing.
you added 10.
Yeah,
If you added the plus or minus there, we added it up.
Right.
okay. So what do you call that if you don't call that contingency? Do you have a different name for that? Isn't that the same thing?
It's a contingency.
Okay.
Right, so I think the point was that we just,
All right, so there's 4 categories of cost where we had differences?
yes.
Okay, it's clear, at least to me, that the access roads and the matting, at least the company's numbers are clear of what they put in. And so you would just check that against whatever your assumptions were and
Right,
whatever
I
your
think the
numbers were.
difference on that, Paul, was that Ed assumed we needed roads the entire length, maybe, and matting the entire length. And we did a detailed assessment before we submitted our proposal to really quantify what roads and matting would be needed.
So I'm taking from that there's not a huge difference in the unit cost. It's primarily the assumption made as to how many miles are needed. Okay. All right, so let's talk about the contingency thing. I think is pretty obvious. Let's go to the boring cost.
Right, this line doesn't have a river crossing, so there wasn't any adjustment made by
Okay,
staff for.
Okay.
Yeah, that was the only the only segment without it, I think,
Okay.
right?
But I'm assuming that for all of the different segments, you've got a similar line for access roads and matting
That's
laid
right.
out in the same manner, so we don't need to go through it each time.
That's right.
I mean, Ed just needs to take the numbers back and look at them.
Can you just give us one more time what the assumptions were per mile?
Sure, the per mile roads here is 271,534. It's on page 68 under access roads and matting. There's a labor and equipment cost estimate, a unit estimate. And then for matting, is an even 1 million a mile.
For this project, but for
Right, the roads for,
Yeah,
the matting is the same
understood.
for all the roads varies.
Okay.
I guess a couple of weeks ago I had asked about if you had assumed we could reuse mats if we were matting the entire length. We did not assume any reuse of mats. We assumed fresh mats for the entire job. We didn't have any reclamation then for, the portion of mats that could be salvaged and would have value at the end of the job.
I mean, in looking, I'll let Ed answer that in a second. In looking at our assumptions versus these, the costs per mile are relatively similar. So I think it really is just about the number of miles we would assume at that point. So
Now, I'm cheating a little bit. I'm jumping ahead to page 133 at the bottom. And the access roads cost, unit cost is 312,500. So it's 312,500 per mile, whereas the other ones all seem to be consistent to 271,534.
That's
So
right. Due
That
to-
means there's something different about that other segment, that it's expected there'll be more need for access roads, I guess.
Right, due to the topography of that
Okay.
segment,
Higher.
the per unit road construction cost was higher.
Okay.
And this was higher than the staff number for roads.
Okay.
So if there aren't any more questions on mats and roads, the next item was restoration. And this was an assumption for the amount of restoration that would need to be done, around tower sites and it's regrading, reseeding, and so on. It's about 17 million for the Edict to Fraser project. And we put that in the temporary road line, as I wasn't sure. That was described in the staff template as temporary road / restoration. So I'm not sure if that's exactly where it fits, but that's where it is. And so those, if you have a color copy, all those purple items are the civil work. The scope is civil for the job. And then the last section is the electrical. It's the last. There's 2 items on page 68 and 2 on page 69, and that's all. Well, the first one, I think it's self-explanatory. It's the guard structures for crossings. It's about 1.5 million. That was put in the staff worksheet in the appropriate line item. The structure erection, this was broken out. So again, there's the number of tangents, angles, and dead ends. There's a line here for the river crossing, structures, and there's 0 for this project. We had proposed overhead crossings and identified the costs for the structures for the overhead river crossings in the other projects. That's where that is. So we didn't assume an underground crossing, but that's how we costed out the overhead portion of the river crossings. Here in the staff worksheet, so this is where the material for the poles. We had preliminary design, towers, weights. We sent the family of drawings to several suppliers. We received 2 budgetary quotes and 1 no bid for supply of steel poles. And so the poles itself is in the material cost for this section. That's labeled 1A1. And the labor and equipment for the erection is in 1B3. And then the last 2 work elements are the actual installing the conductor and installing the OPGW. Installing both of them, again, the labor and equipment was built out for the number of miles, the number of structures, and put in labor. The materials, it's a little hard to follow, but the first item is the conductor. Is a double bundle of 1590 Falcon. Again, the material cost was based on quotes. I mean, we have bought a couple thousand miles of 1590 ACSR in the past few years, and so we have good relationships with vendors and good understanding of the conductor cost. The next 3 items, the clipping in, is where the insulators show up, and so those items were added to the insulators. And then the spacers were put in the other materials on the staff worksheet. And
So just where it says install conductor, pull conductor, is that the actual cost of the conductor
yes,
as well?
There's
It's not just the installation, it's the actual equipment or the
the material column is the material cost, and the
Okay.
labor and equipment is the labor
I
and
see it now.
equipment cost.
Okay. Okay. I understand, thank you.
And then the last is OPGW. And similarly, the material cost, the first 3 rows are the OPGW cost itself. And then the last 3 rows were miscellaneous. So that's the bulk of the construction, labor, and material. And I guess kind of going forward to the
If
first
you could-
page.
Just one second.
Okay.
If you could go back to the first page, which is page 62 at the
Yeah,
bottom.
that's where I was going next.
Okay. Explain to me how the contingency works on the number that you have here, and then how the plus and minus was intended by you to work.
The contingency here was our estimate of, it's just kind of normal developer's contingency. When we reach the point of financing, the lenders are going to require us to have a certain amount of contingency greater than the actual estimated cost at that time, in order to
And
make sure we have all the funds necessary to complete the project under different scenarios.
And presumably that relates to all the numbers that go before it,
Yes.
right? Okay. And so then how does the plus or minus come in? Is that because that you're at the early stages of the project and it's very difficult without a design to do a
Right,
final estimate?
The December 16th order required to have a margin of error.
Mhm.
And so our estimator, for different components, said, well, this is a plus or minus 10, this is a plus or minus 20, based on the level of, uncertainty. Materials have a little bit more uncertainty and more fluctuation relatively.
Okay, thank you.
So back on this first page, the CAW has a total material and a total labor are the outputs of that spreadsheet. It was divided per mile, and then it was applied back here per mile under major equipment. So the 37 million for equipment and the 126 million for labor. The reference on here is to the CAW. So that was the, if we had an EPC contract with the EPC contractor, that's the estimated EPC contract cost. Then the other kind of owner's costs, line terminations, engineering, permitting, all those items were identified here on this itemized worksheet, and also cross-referenced to where they were entered into the staff worksheet.
Okay. Could you give us an example where there was a boring cost? Could you find us one of the sheets that where?
Sure.
Because that was one of the items that was added by staff.
That was the last one that we need to talk about.
So let's see where those numbers are.
Page 127 of the work papers.
Which section?
Well, it's page 127 of the work papers. The page numbers are from the March 2nd. So
Yeah, no. I'm there.
Okay, so
I'm
the
just-
very bottom line, install structures, river crossing, lattice structure. So we had 0 boring costs because our base assumption was an overhead river crossing. We have 2 structures for the river crossing, one on either side of the river, labor and equipment and material. So we had a total of $5 million assumed for our overhead river crossing that you would subtract and replace with the boring cost if we were going to go under the river. And we did include in our proposal, we don't have a problem going under the river if that's what's recommended, and if there are any river crossings, we would do them underground. We just didn't do a cost estimate for that work. And so there's a note on here that says 2 leads to PV. This overall construction, this overall CAW is for New Scotland to leads to PV. And so here, the river crossing was assigned to the leads to PV section, both in our March 2nd filing and in completing the staff worksheet.
Okay, so this isn't 100% clear to me yet. You were proposing an overhead crossing, or you were proposing an overhead crossing with an indication that you'd be willing to go under the water?
We proposed an overhead crossing with an indication we'd be willing to go under the water, but that our cost was assuming an overhead.
Okay. And what did we do, Ed?
We assumed the underwater crossing because of the fact that any new lines that cross the Hudson River that all lines will be underwater.
Okay.
So that means you have to meet an Army Corps permit and all that, and the fact that you're going to be making a large U under the ground.
Sure. I mean, it's a little bit as an aside, but yesterday, or earlier this week, the PJM board approved a recommendation for a project to LS Power that is about a 3-mile river crossing that'll be underground. And so we're becoming very educated on HDD and other underwater installation techniques. So.
Okay, so Lawrence, I think you said that if we wanted to reflect an underwater crossing, we would subtract out the estimate you have for the overhead crossing and add in the estimate for the underground
That's right.
water crossing. Okay. And did you guys look at the numbers Ed had for the underwater crossing?
I did look at them. It struck me as high, but I don't have necessarily what the number would be because we don't know how many cables there would be, the capacity of the cables, how many crossings there would be, and so I don't know exactly what the right number would be.
Ed, where'd that estimate come from?
That estimate's based upon previous underwater crossings that we've seen, and the commission has, put in Article 7s.
And they were for an HDD crossing?
Oh, yeah.
And was the,
They're very, each one had its little idiosyncrasies. I can tell you that they were not without grave difficulty. One had to find a conveyor left in the river many years ago,
so
still there.
were they, did you take it per mile and then apply per mile back, or you just said this is
This is just an
it's
estimate.
the same voltage and roughly the same
Basically,
capacity?
basically 345 with, trying to push and ultimately pushing a big pipe through to get the cables down there. But because this channel is so deep, you're going to have a lot to think about because they allow ocean-growing vessels to go all the way up to Albany.
Okay. And do you know, I mean, is the depth of bedrock such that you would have to go through bedrock, or it was all just soil?
I didn't make an estimate at all about that.
Okay.
Ultimately, the Army Corps of Engineers will make you go through all that detail when you go to apply for the permit.
Sure.
So for the categories, I think that touched on all four, right? The roads, the matting, the boring costs, and the contingency, which we just took the high side on. Was there anything else that you guys noticed that you wanted to discuss? I mean, I think that was our list of things that we wanted to clarify.
Well, I don't think well, I think there's one thing. I mean, the methodology for all the other projects was the same. There was the error that
Oh,
that Paul
right.
had asked about, and I can explain that.
Just before you get there, Lawrence, on the contingency, I mean, I think this plus or minus interval was really a function of, we provided that because the commission asked for it. I mean, it's not really the way that we estimate projects. And we have contingency, as you can see, built into our estimate already. So just taking our high end of that range and adding it to our estimate, we don't feel is appropriate.
So the last 4 pages of the work papers is the call for the New Scotland to Leeds to Pleasant Valley 115 kV corridor. And it's labeled Knickerbocker to Pleasant Valley 115 kV, but that's really the gist of the error. The error was, well, the estimator did the estimate for the entire New Scotland to Knickerbocker to Pleasant Valley line. So it was assuming the 345 kV line from New Scotland to Knickerbocker with an overhead river crossing, and then the 115 kV underbuild. So it was 345 kV circuit with 2 115 kVs underbuilt, our 80-foot tall H-frame structure. So the first page is not affected by the error.
Page you on?
I'm on the page 132 and 133. That's the last 4 pages of the work papers. So the overall New Scotland to Knickerbocker to Pleasant Valley project would be 65.9 miles, and the Knickerbocker to Pleasant Valley portion is 54.2 miles. And so some of these items are for the larger project and weren't correctly scaled to the scope of this project. So for example, we had 65.9 miles of roads. This is the case where we assumed 1 mile of road per 1 mile because even though there's an existing 115 kV line in this right-of-way, both the field and the Google map and the other aerial investigations saw that the condition of the road really wasn't there to use, and that we would be building 1 mile of road per mile of line. So the estimate here has 65.9 miles. It really should be 54.2 miles of roads. And so the number here in this row was scaled based on that ratio, 54.2 divided by 65.9 in the work papers. The matting was not scaled. So the 15 miles of matting here, the New Scotland and Knickerbocker really didn't have any matting. All 15 miles of matting was on the Knickerbocker to Pleasant Valley, that's where all the agricultural areas were. And so it kept the 15 miles of matting at the million miles per mile in what was entered in the staff work paper. So the next section on the foundations, the first 3 rows of foundations are the monopoles, and there aren't any monopoles on this project. So those 3 lines were not carried over. Only the next 3 lines, the tangents and dead ends, and the rock, I guess the rock for the overall project was carried over, or was scaled. The rock was proportionally scaled from the 12 million based on the project.
So obviously, I assume that cuts the estimate by how much approximately?
I think it was about 50 million. I'd have to, because the substations were added, and so the bottom line number is with substations. So just, I guess, to continue to kind of show the adjustments, the restoration was scaled based on the 54.2 miles. The electrical was carried over, I think. And then on the next page, all of the H-frame structures were carried over. The 345 kV conductor was scaled to the 54.2 miles, but the OP and the OPGW was scaled to the 54.2 miles, but the 115 kV conductor was correct. It was for the 54.2 miles of 115 kV conductor with 2 circuits.
Okay, so could you provide a replacement spreadsheet for pages 132 through 135 that has all the corrections made in it?
Sure.
So that we'll be able to see exactly how everything carried over.
And then put it at the bottom of the page that it was corrected on what date?
Okay. Now, in the template that was provided, the corrections were made?
Yes,
Okay.
the math was done on that
Okay.
page.
And as far as the correction, since it is to the original, just Steve, I would probably file that with the secretary.
Okay.
Ed, did you have any other questions?
Anything else you want to provide to us?
No,
Tell
not,
us.
not at this time.
Okay, this is now an opportunity for anybody in the audience to ask a question if you would like. Please come forward and use one of the microphones if you want to ask a question. Does anybody want to ask a question? Okay, not seeing any then. I guess we're done. Let's take a 5-minute break and we'll bring the New York TOs up to the front table. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
projects in New England for the past 10 years. Quite a few projects of $1 billion scale, most of them 345 kV as a matter of fact, and 115. So our estimates are based on that work experience over the last 10 years, and then the costs are escalated up to 2014 as submitted. The way we did our project, and it looks very segmented here, and that was intentional. We segmented all the transmission lines between major nodes for estimating, for designing, for environmental permitting, for everything, and then we put the segments together for individual projects. So that's the way our presentation reads. So for this first one on page 13, which is the total projects, Edict to New Scotland and Knickerbocker to Pleasant Valley, that's our P11 project. We start with the Knickerbocker to Pleasant Valley portion. First segment of that is Knickerbocker to Churchtown, so that's the first entry you see here. Below that, we'll do Churchtown to PV, and that's the way we put our work together. So we took our estimates and broke them up into the items that you requested. So going down from top to bottom, we have our materials for the line work, and those are our costs. I have the miles running all the way down, which just is there for your reference, and then down below we get to access roads is where we have miles for access roads as requested for matting and non-matted work. So what we had submitted previously was just material total and labor and equipment total on our original submittal. So here we broke it down into the different components that you requested. Is there any questions on how we do that, or?
Okay, so if I wanted to figure out your cost per mile, I would divide the developer cost number by 21.9?
Yeah, you could
basically.
do that. And matter of fact, let me explain that. Our estimates were all based on a per mile basis. What we did is the engineer designed a representative 1 mile section of transmission line. We did a lot of survey, a lot of experience on Knickerbocker PV. That was our focus for pretty much the beginning of this project. So we have a representative line, and through designing that, he came up with a 5.5 tangent structures and one heavy or dead end or heavy angle or dead end structure per mile. So then he did a detailed design for that, and then pulled all the cost estimates for that, and then we did that for each structure type. If you look at our application, we put our cross sections in. So for every cross section, or for every segment line, we give the different typical cross sections. So if we had 5 miles of this or 3 miles of that, we change the estimates accordingly. So everything's based on that 1 mile typical line section for each different type of structure we used. So that's how it all adds up. So this here, when you do this here to Knickerbocker to Churchtown, it may actually be a compilation of 2 or 3 different types of cross sections. But for Knickerbocker Churchtown, coincidentally, it's pretty much the same type of structure. So after the materials, we did the same thing with the labor and equipment. We separated it out per the components you asked for. We provided the ones that we did have in our backup. The rock drilling and blasting that you asked for, we left that 0 because we have that as a 25% assumed rock in our foundation cost above, both in the labor and equipment. So I left that blank. This project has no HDD, so it's nothing there. The rider poles are, we have that included in our line construction costs on a per mile basis for the line construction. We get to temporary workarounds on this project. You asked down below, I think down as a indirect cost, you had something that referred to moving lines around for outages. So I call that a temporary workarounds for sectionalizing lines. And this particular segment, the first one we're talking about, Knickerbocker Churchtown, we are going to have to take 2 lines out of service at the same time to build the new double circuit line down the right of way. It was too narrow to do anything else. So we had an extra cost in here for sectionalizing all the 115 lines between Knickerbocker and Churchtown, and so that we could keep all the lines fed at least on a radial feed from the north or south, and then work in between every tap. So this one and a little bit of Churchtown to PV has this cost in here for what I call temporary workarounds, labor and material both.
Just to clarify, so I'm looking at page 19, so that's left blank in the indirect cost. It's slid into the,
Right.
okay.
And my comments, if I provide the comments to you, it would say that. For all of these, we
Okay,
have those
thank you.
available. Okay. So access roads, we had provided, I believe, two prices originally, matted and unmatted. And so here we broke it down as asked for. Our assumption on here, we did a straight line down the right-of-way, and we had the GIS and environmental people identify wetlands for us and ag lands for us. And so then we came up with the miles here. So this first segment's 21.9 miles. We have 17.9 miles matted, which is a combination of ag land and wetland, which I think is going to be significantly more than most others are going to put in there. So we have only 4 miles unmatted. And for there, we did not assume that any of the access roads were usable for a 4-season road to work in New England for snow and rain in the spring and winter. So we put down typically a pretty heavy 4-season road, a gravel access road. Any questions on that? So you can see in here it includes all the structure work pads, pulling work.
One
Go ahead.
second. Is matting ever appropriate in areas other than ag lands and wetlands?
Not that I can imagine. And matting, I mean, New York, I think, is specific and kind of unique in the matting ag lands. We haven't done that in other parts of New England.
The purpose of matting is to keep the soil from getting compacted, is that right?
Understand, right?
Okay.
I understand that they don't want us to put gravel or rock down and leave that behind. Even if we clean it up, there's always some behind. So understand that New York requires matting. Anything that could be agricultural or that is agricultural. So it's a pretty high number.
Okay, thank you.
So we have it included in, again, as I said, in all of the polling sites and the temporary work sites, and we have some assumptions about the percent we assumed for all those as well in our comments I could provide to you. It's a 16-foot wide matted, and the access roads are 20-foot wide with this 2-foot shoulders on each side, so a 16-foot drivable surface. Then after that's the primary part of the construction. After that, we have the line for Churchtown to PV. It's the same methodology. Here, my workarounds, I only affected the first 3 miles, which the right-of-way was too narrow, even though it's 2 double circuits down there. It was too narrow of a right-of-way to get 1 out of service and try to build and keep 3 in service. So I have the same workaround cost there for just that 3-mile section. The methodology is all the same for this line work. We're going to demolish 2 double circuit lattice towers, Churchtown to PV, and build 1 new double circuit line. So next page is access roads for there. Again, here we have 17 miles of matted, 15 miles unmatted. Is that correct? That's what it says. Of the 32-mile segment. Okay. So then after that, we started doing the substations. So we identified major equipment there. The first one is Knickerbocker 345 kV, so no transformers there, it's just a switch yard. It's a 3-terminal line. So we identified our breakers and relay control house work as requested, our fence work. I broke up the materials and labor accordingly. Then next we have the Churchtown rebuilt. We're going to take the 115, we're going to demolish and rebuild on as much of the existing site as we can instead of expanding north and stay on the same property. Any questions on any of that? So then we put in interconnection work, so we have various lines for Knickerbocker PV. We have allowances for all of our projects this way, interconnections and the system upgrade facilities. Some we have more information on, some we have just an allowance in there for unknowns. There should be one here that's specifically as an interconnection would be Pleasant Valley is an obvious known, so we have the details there for what it would take to tie in a new 345 line at Pleasant Valley. We'd swap one of the existing over to an existing bay. That cost is in there. And then terminate our new line into the bay that we vacated to avoid a line crossing. So that detail is provided. I'm on page 15. And then the remainder of this is system upgrade facilities, lines and stations for the Knickerbocker PV segment. Bottom of page 15, we start over then at the Edict to New Scotland. So the first line segment's Edict to Princetown Junction, 66 miles. Same methodology. You can't see it here in the detail, but you can in our cross sections. You know, first 12 miles we're going to reconduct our existing steel pole line, and then for the remainder to Princetown Junction we're going to take down two 115 kV H-frame structures and build a new 345. That price is in there. We have a couple bypass areas where the two lines aren't together in the same right-of-way, and so for those we had to go with a vertical structure to stay within the right-of-way. It narrows for just one 115 line, so there's probably two 5-mile sections where we have that. So same methodology. For this section here, we have 63 miles matted of the 75. No, wait, hold a second. 75 is different, I'm sorry. That included the two bypasses. It's a 66.8 mile line route. So we have 63 miles matted, and we have unmatted. For structure work pads and other work, I have 75.6 because that includes doing the demo on the bypasses. That's why that mileage is a little bit larger. Princetown to New Scotland is the next segment, 19.7 miles. The only removal we have on there is about a mile where we come together on a double circuit 115, 345. The rest of it's just new construction 345. The matting there is 19.4 miles of 19.7, so it's almost entirely agricultural or wetlands. Next segment is Princetown to Rotterdam. There we have two 230 kVH frames. We're going to replace with two 345s. We're going to loop in the existing 345 and build the new 345 at Rotterdam, expand Rotterdam. So this is two construction sequences where we can only take one line out at a time for a short period in the spring and the fall. So we designed that line to do 3 months. We'll do 5 miles on one side in the fall, 3 months in the spring, we'd do the other 5 miles. And then we have that section ready to go so we can take out the 60 miles between Edict to Princetown Junction of the existing number 30 and 31 lines. So we can take those out of service to build our line. So that's a 10-mile project, or that's a 5-mile project with 2 lines. We're matting 4 miles of the 5 miles there, near the bottom of page 17. Okay. Then through the substations, Rotterdam 345 kV yard is the first major substation. We're going to expand and rebuild. We include the 345 cost here. It's a 115, 230 yard now. It'll be a 345 small 230 terminal and a 115 yard when we're finished. This is the 345 cost required for this project. 53 million. We avoided the Princetown substation at what we now call Princetown Junction, and brought the 345 into Rotterdam where it's probably better suited. Then we're interconnection costs. We know we have some at Edic Station. We're going to relocate, similar to Pleasant Valley, relocate an existing line to an available bay so we can bring our new line in and avoid a 345 crossing there. So there we have a detailed estimate of $1 million. New Scotland transmission station, we're going to bring in one terminal, new terminal in between two existing bays, and we have to relocate almost all the lines to make that work. So our relocation cost at New Scotland for relocating about 4 or 5 345 lines as they approach for about a half a mile into it. So that's a little bit more expensive than the others, 3.8 million. That was a detail. Well, I shouldn't say detailed design. That was based on a per mile basis for those lines, similar to the other 345 work. Various lines, Edic to New Scotland, that'd be interconnections for miscellaneous other work that we didn't cover with New Scotland and Edic. That would be the cutovers and workarounds to tap in at Princetown Junction, a 345 line, to make the Princetown to Rotterdam connection. Same with upgrade, system upgrade facilities, various stations for Edic New Scotland. It's allowance. And we did the same with, the first one is lines, the second one is stations on page 19. And then we get to the indirect costs for the bottom of that, for the end of that project. So we have our engineering substation. This is just transferred as we submitted in our original application, transfer the numbers over. This is where the movement of existing transmission to accommodate outage costs, and I put that up in the direct cost and called it the temporary workarounds. Legal permitting, all these other numbers straight off of our original application. Job management, we took our project management, program management, which combined them together. Excuse me, identified these first items that you provided to us as full-time requirements, determined the length of construction for each of these projects, and came up with a cost, an average cost per person based on 510s, and then came out what these would cost for this project. It's probably, without looking at my notes, probably about a 2-year construction project. So then we subtracted those numbers from our original total to come up with the remaining number, and then to determine how many FTEs that would be for 4 years, approximately, project management, permitting, and closeout before and after construction. So we have those numbers available. Again, that was based as a % of construction, so they all came out pretty good to with the FTEs available to manage the project, most of them. Sure. Our program management, in addition to the field construction, is start to finish permitting. Community relations team that's involved in these projects is not one, or it's just one. It's usually several people involved. Procurement, we'll have a team of people doing procurement, and then contract administration. We'll have project controls, which is documentation of all communication between contractors and the owner. Scheduling, estimating, thank you. And then document control is a big part of what we do for these projects of this scale. Are always audited. It's not a matter of if audited, but when audited. So we spend quite a bit of effort of keeping records of communications and change and cost. Construction management, again, is not. There's one construction manager up above. We'll have safety. We'll have a lot of superintendents in the field watching all the work, full-time at every substation, and then sparingly on the transmission lines as we can get to the different crews who are working up and down the right-of-way. Same with safety. We'll have a safety manager on the project and several safety inspectors working the projects. Then project closeout and to finish up the job. It's usually about 6 months after construction ends. Same time they're doing the right-of-way restoration, close out the project. So we put in as a % our numbers based on our experience on the other projects, and it's typically what we see on all of our projects, and it pretty much works out And like I said, we did this with the number of FTEs available after the balance of these identified 6 titles that you gave us. So we think we're pretty well covered on that. Subtotal, all directs and indirect costs. I don't know if you had that number in there, but I added that in there, I think. Risk and contingency. We did a risk and contingency of all of our projects, either 25, 27, or 30%. For those transmission lines that we've gone out and done all the survey, and we're very confident of our line design and staying in the right of way, and environmental field investigations we've done, and that would be this route here, Edict to New Scotland, Knickerbocker to PV. And we actually did New Scotland to Knickerbocker when we thought we were going to build a line there. So for those projects that include that, we have a 25% contingency because we're a lot more confident on that. For the other projects, that would be New Scotland to Leeds and Leeds to PV, where we didn't do the same amount of survey and environmental field investigation. We started with 30%. And then projects that combine the two, depending on what percentage was stuff we knew and didn't know, we put 27% for our risk and contingency. And that's just based on our experience with the typical, at a preliminary design stage, that we try to usually keep 30% in there until we work it down to, we get construction bids in hand. We'll go down to 10 or 15% at that stage for risk and contingency. And that would be with all bids in hand. We'd go to 10, so that's our experience and our practice. AFUDC, we calculated AFUDC, the percent, is it listed here? As we submitted, I think it was 6.4%. It's in our filing. It's in my notes here. So we did AFUDC on the cumulative cost of all the work in progress as it builds up, and then as we put any major transmission line or substation in service, then we take that out of the cost that we're carrying forward. So we did AFUDC compounded monthly throughout the project, and then we have a detailed schedule for all the work. We use that. Escalation then would be the same, 3% escalation, compounded monthly throughout the duration of the project to escalate our costs up. We use 3%, and again, our original project was based on 2014 numbers.
I think this is pretty obvious, but the subtotal, all direct and indirect costs, 804 million, that does not include anything for risk and contingencies, AFUDC, and escalation. Is that correct?
Correct.
So has anything changed since you made the filing with us on the bottom line of adding up all the direct and
There's a
indirect
few,
costs?
I did checked as much as I could to get the percentages the same when I went from a per mile basis on long linear numbers, and then I broke it down into all the smaller components. There's a lot of rounding errors. So most of the projects you'll see here, and I had the numbers on the side, are within 1%,
Okay.
plus or minus. This one here is just a little bit more. I think this is about 2% off, there's something in there, because I got the Edict New Scotland to match, I got Knickerbocker PV to match, but when I put them together, I'm off by 2% instead of 1%. Again, it could be accumulation of rounding errors.
Can you just go back to what was the AFUDC rate again? Just remind me.
6 exact? 6.4. 6.40.
And what were the topics that trial staff had adjusted? Is it just the AFUDC and the escalation, or were there other adjustments?
Trial staff removed risk and contingency, AFUDC, and escalation.
Okay.
Just one thing I'd like to add. I know matting is a big issue in these estimates. Just a data point for your reference.
Is your mic on? I
Should
can't
be
hear you
on.
very well.
Okay, soft talking. Just as a data point, we have another project going on up in the eastern part of New York where we went out and did a competitive bid for matting services. We got those bids back 2 weeks ago, and those bids are coming in at about $1.5 million per mile. So it hasn't been awarded yet, but I just wanted to, as a checkpoint for the numbers we have.
Okay.
I'm sorry, then on the sheet that we submitted, we transferred our notes for all the access matting that you'd asked for down below under the total. So there's all of our assumptions on our matting cost and our access road cost, or I should say matting and unmatted corresponding. Okay, that's what they got, right?
So with all these estimates that you provided us today, are these estimated numbers for direct and indirect costs the same as that you submitted in your original filing?
Yes, within 1% or so. Like I said, all of them except one is within 1%. We got the numbers to match.
Okay.
And that would be all categories.
One question, just like to ask you. One of the aspects of our projects here is that some of them will be able to alleviate or mitigate the need to invest in other capital projects that we have on the in our plans. How will that be taken into consideration?
The cost-benefit analysis is going to address that for everybody. Anything else? Ed? Nothing? Okay, they seem to have exhausted their discussion. Is anybody in the audience want to ask a question? If you do, please come up to one of the microphones. Come on up here. Have a seat.
Like, you know, it's so close. The microphone.
Two quick questions. Coke Oakley with Next Era Energy. Could you explain a little bit more about the definition that it's a responsibility in ag lands to mat to the extent that you have? We've had conversations with DEC and they don't have a requirement. So we just want clarification.
Do we have any environmental people who can come up to help with that a little bit? I'm looking back here. Anybody?
It's a requirement that all ag lands have to be matted so that you don't have compaction and have to go through a lot more work to restore the soil back to productivity.
And that's a requirement by ag markets or who?
It's a requirement that's put into the certificate conditions. Gentleman here from Ag and Markets will
Okay.
help you out here.
Why don't you come grab this mic, introduce yourself.
Matt Brower, Department of Agriculture and Markets. The problem we've seen over the years is that we don't know when these power lines are going to be built, what time of year, what soil conditions will be. And often the weather changes. And so if you don't have some type of stable access across the fields, once construction starts, if it turns wet, we get one of these cloud bursts like we get this time of year, all of a sudden the soils are saturated. Construction doesn't stop, it continues, so you get rutting and mixing of the topsoil and subsoil material. You get compaction. We've had places where the soil almost turned to liquid on the right-of-way. And then the farmers trying to grow something there afterwards, it's extremely difficult. So it's all a way to provide access throughout construction that's a good stable access that can be easily removed when construction is done. As opposed to, we used to have them strip the topsoil, put down a gravel road with fabric underneath, and then remove that, decompact, put the topsoil back. But, you know, that's greater disturbance. With the matting, a lot of times you don't get anywhere near the compaction. So it's a neater, cleaner way to protect the fields.
But would you agree that some technologies might be where you don't have to go in multiple times into an ag right-of-way, that a lower impact type of construction process could perhaps avoid full matting, which would have its impacts all by itself?
Depends on,
really depends
each
on the
project's
site.
a little different in each situation, whether there's clearing that's necessary and so on. Every project's different. There may possibly be a situation here and there where if it's one trip in, one trip out, and you can control when that happens, it may be possible to do it without matting.
Okay.
But that's done on a site-by-site
Right.
basis. Once a project's approved, we go through with the EM&CP and determine which fields need matting and which don't. But up front, we plan on matting everything just to be safe.
Okay, thank you. And then one last question. Appreciate the response there.
Thanks, Matt.
The job management for both the Knickerbocker, Pleasant Valley, it's 100, well, excuse me, the edict to Pleasant Valley, 150 miles, has the job management of inspectors at approximately the laundry list, 1.1 million, but it's the same as on page 4 for the Knickerbocker to Pleasant Valley. You have 1.1 million, even though that's only 54 miles. Is there?
This was, that number was based on the months of construction for one full-time equivalent, one full-time inspector that they asked for. We'll have more inspectors than that.
But
So
you're
that way
assuming
then-
then the same construction period for Knickerbocker, the 54 miles versus 150?
Yes, we can build the edict to New Scotland at the same time we can build Knickerbocker PV. The outage constraints aren't going to affect each other, so
Okay.
yes.
Thank you.
Make sure the mic's on.
Good morning. Is it on?
So.
My name is Dan Duthie. I'm here on behalf of the Hudson Valley Smart Energy Coalition. I just have a couple of quick questions in terms of if I were to look at your cost estimates, where would I find the cost of this proceeding and your participation in this proceeding?
That's in our legal and permitting.
Okay, so it's in there.
We carry that all in the permitting up until we start with the next stage.
And are you accruing AFUDC on those costs?
With my, yes, I'm sure I am. I'm carrying all cost forward from inception to.
Does each Transco participant have their own AFUDC rate, or is it a rate that's used for the whole project?
We utilized one rate for the whole project.
And where would I find the number of construction workers that you anticipate would be employed over the construction period?
That information would be coming out in the Part B submittal when we get to that stage.
Do you have any estimates at this point?
Not in front of me, no.
And similarly, would there be cost estimates for the number of full-time employees after commercial operation?
That also would come out in the Part B.
Okay, thank you.
Dan, before you go, staff created a model for figuring out the present value revenue requirement. That model includes certain assumptions on AFUDC, maintenance of the lines, maintenance workers going forward. That model is going to be used to estimate the cost of AFUDC And nothing we're doing in any of these proceedings is setting any rates. But whatever assumptions they may have made, you should be looking at the staff model to see how staff is going to be treating that whole issue.
And Paul, has that model been issued
It
yet?
has been circulated to the parties. It
Okay.
should be in your in tray somewhere.
Okay, I'll find it.
Okay.
Thank you.
It's
An
a
ex-
spreadsheet
and-
with a lot of lines and
Yeah,
numbers on it.
An explanation of some of the components went out to the parties, I think, on Wednesday as well. So.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Looks like you got one more.
John Vu with NextEra. Just one quick question. For the system upgrade cost estimates, the system upgrade facilities, was that based on actual system impact studies, or I guess was it just, I guess, up in the air estimate, or was it based on actual study?
Yeah, the numbers that we've put into the estimate are based on some upgrades we're aware of. As we indicated, that we still have to go through the SIS process, so there may be others that are identified, but what we've put forward here is those that we've identified through our own internal studies.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, let's take a 5-minute break, and next era, if you could bring your people up here.
to speak up just a little bit.
Okay. Okay.
That's why nobody.
We'll try to talk louder. I personally would like to thank you for putting all this onto one page. Okay, why don't you present what you submitted?
Okay, good. By way of introduction, we're here with our full engineering complement as well as our electrical complement.
Okay, Monique, you're going to have to just look at the microphone and
Okay.
don't worry about looking at anybody else.
Okay. We're here with our engineering team, our power flow team, as well as our environmental people. So I'll turn it over to Dan Mayer to give a little bit of background on NextEra's experience.
Dan Mayer's NextEra. Just as a matter of record, NextEra is primarily we're building transmission for a lot of our wind and solar projects all over the United States. And so, one thing we want to make clear is that we go into various states to do this work, and we review the rules, the requirements, the codes. So, while we have not done a lot of work here in New York, we're cognizant of the fact that we're quite capable of doing the work. We feel very confident that the estimate that we're about to describe and provide to you today will show that, having done this type of work in California and Texas and Oklahoma and Colorado, and that we've looked at all the various requirements, that we feel that, we've looked from a bottom-up approach, that this estimate is sound, that we're confident in the numbers that we have, and that, we'll be happy to describe it, but that I know there's been some concerns about issues, we're not covering everything, but we believe that we have a high confidence level that we can tell you today that we have a good solid estimate here to describe. So,
And if I can jump in on New York experience, I myself have licensed many Article 7 projects in New York, including Newbridge Road Connector, Capture Island Cable. I've been involved with Cross Sound Cable and Neptune, a variety of generation ties as well as substations, as Paul well knows. So I do have the New York experience. I do know what it takes to license something here in New York. So about 2 years ago, I left Long Island and went down to NextEra, and I can see that they do a very different way of estimating and construction than is typically done. So,
yeah. I guess if we're just talking about general points, obviously NextEra's binding bid and the binding bid submitted by all the developers was a critical component of the proceeding, and especially of the cost-sharing mechanism, although I do note that one developer, Transco, still hasn't submitted a binding bid. NextEra is, of course, more than willing to discuss the details of its binding bid here at the technical conference with trial staff. And it does appear that the differences between trial staff's cost estimate and NextEra's binding bid largely relate to 4 broad cost categories, and those would be labor, roads, matting, and construction management. But just one point I wanted to kind of make clear before we get into the nitty-gritty is that, we are here, NextEra is here to explain its firm and binding bid, but not to adjust it. And frankly, really, none of the binding bids by any of the developers should be subject to adjustment. NextEra, as Dan and Monique have indicated, stands by its bid as complete and comprehensive and entirely valid and reliable, and backed up by NextEra's vast knowledge and experience in the energy infrastructure industry. It is, as we'll discuss, a bottom-up bid that wasn't, it wasn't a figure was determined and then the numbers were kind of built into that. It was built up the other way, where the individual line items were determined and then those were used to determine the bid. NextEra has, the bid was developed with databases and methodologies and techniques that NextEra has used throughout the country in developing an exemplary track record of delivering major infrastructure projects, including transmission projects, on time and on budget. So we have the utmost confidence in the bid. Throughout the proceeding, NextEra has actually been pushing to have for even firmer bid mechanism, and that's just, I think, emblematic of the confidence NextEra has in its bid and its cost estimating methodology. So, with that, we can get into more specifics.
If I could add also, we've built over 1,000 miles in the last 5 years of 345 kV circuits, both, again, around the state. That doesn't include 230, 138, but I know we're talking mostly here 345 kV, but we've used the monopole concrete technology in the vast majority of those cases. So again, that's where our confidence is on this particular subject.
Okay, so can we focus on the 4 topic areas then: labor, roads, matting, and construction management? Could you take us through those 4 areas?
Can we get a quick explanation of what exactly we're looking at, and then dive into those categories?
Well, essentially, we followed your template. We've got it for our five routes as they're labeled up top. We've broken it into transmission, material labor work, and then also substation work, and then indirects down below. We've also tried to identify, I guess, the non-scope items that were not in our scope that were added on to make sure we're actually comparing apples to apples. So hidden on the areas that you guys had made adjustments on, one was labor. We have since gone back and recalculated our labor material ratios, subtotals and ratios. Pretty sure we resubmitted those. And of course, we're much higher than your 1.8. We're actually closer to 2.5 on all of our routes, predominantly because we know our material costs are lower using these concrete poles. We've already got budgetary costs from our pole supplier with delivery included in our estimate. Additionally, just talking about materials, we buy a lot of poles, conductor, OPGW, and we're continuously working with vendors, multiple vendors. We repeatedly bid to these guys to keep the cost down and get better pricing. So with certainty, our material costs are very aggressive and very low based on budgetary proposals from our vendors. Additionally, on labor, the division of material and labor are not cut and dry, so there's some gray areas of what's actually in labor and what's in true materials. But hopefully with this detail we gave you, you guys can see where our numbers come from and where they adjust to. The second area you guys talked about and added money was matting. We provided 3 types of road access, basically permanent, unmatted, temporary and restored, unmatted, and then matted areas with restoration. We've taken a portion of the line based on line route and based on the surveys that our environmental folks had done on wetland areas to determine how much we think would be potentially needing matting. We did not assume that all ag areas would be matted. We talked with several agencies and we really feel that that's an over-conservative estimate to assume you're going to mat every bit of agriculture. We work day by day and in areas and watch weather and manage our work so that we're not working in wet areas or in ag areas that would do wet. Most of this area is rolling hills. There's not standing water. We just don't see that matting would be required in all areas. Additionally, a lot of the work will be done. Some will be in the fall after harvesting season, some in the spring before planting. We work diligently with each landowner to determine what they require and to make sure we restore it back to their requirements. As an estimate, I can go into, we've recently bid matting on a job in Florida, actually a pipeline job. So we've worked up estimates. We believe for us a per mile cost of matting would be anywhere from $600,000 up to $1 million. Of course, it's based on the level of matting required. I mean, there's areas where it's deeper, multiple matting is required. Some areas it's a single matting area. But that's based on true bids, both purchase cost and lease pricing that we recently got from multiple vendors.
Do we have somewhere your calculation by line segment as to how many miles of matting is included in your numbers?
Well, I think we provided the right-of-way, the length of wetlands per line segment. Most of them average in the 3 to 5 mile range only of true wetlands that we'll be crossing. Additionally, we wouldn't necessarily work in the whole wetland, you may be spanning the wetland as well, or portions of it.
Okay, so where would I find the miles of wetland that you've calculated?
Yeah, we submitted it, right?
We submitted that in March 2nd, the March 2nd filing.
So, okay. Are you saying basically that your matting estimate matches your miles of wetland estimate?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
And also the agricultural district. And just to go into that a little bit further,
Okay, so you're saying, just to be clear, you're saying all wetland areas that you've identified, you're assuming matting.
yes.
Okay, and then what are you assuming in agricultural districts?
Also matting as needed, it's seasonal matting. So we assume that we would be doing some of that, but not completely in the agricultural districts.
Okay, and when you say agricultural district, are you talking about something that's designated as an agricultural district or just all ag land?
Correct, yeah.
Just something that's designated? All right, so in the March 2nd filing, that should be apparent?
Yes.
Okay.
I think we did a methodology similar to what Nat did. We looked at a lot of GIS aerial data. We did numerous site visits with construction contractors, as well as our engineering contractors and environmental contractors. We assessed the existing roads that are there that provide access to the existing lines. We looked at their conditions, how they need to be improved. And then we looked, the least desirable was going over wetlands. If there's an existing road, you want to use that or improve it. And then we also looked at the agricultural district crossings as well, and obviously tried to avoid that to the extent possible. A lot of this is still an estimate, desktop estimate, and it will be refined based on survey data, and obviously in the EM&CP stage. But this is we feel very comfortable with these numbers, and I think staff had calculated that we would have to map the entire length. It appeared that was what they were. The difference in cost between ours and theirs. Coke, do you want to add anything to that?
I think just as a Coke Coakley with NextAir Environmental, as I mentioned earlier, and John, you may want to expand on this, the issue of the construction technique. Again, the monopole doesn't require concrete trucks. The monopole doesn't require multiple piers for foundations. The monopole is just a simple drill, put the pole in, and move on. You want to expand on the construction technique? I mean, that's one of the reasons we don't think we'll have quite the construction impact, particularly to ag lands that are appropriate, and we took that into account.
Yeah, as Coke stated, we're not bringing in concrete trucks. We're going to get the pole to the site, bore the hole, set the pole, and then fill it and move on. We're our plan is not to be in any area very long and keep moving down the line. If there's an area we get rains and wet, we either move on beyond that and come back to it. We don't want to work in the wet areas. It's not good for our equipment. It's not good for our crews, and we can come back and work an area when it dries out if we run into rain. We've got a long schedule, so different times of year it rains more. Sometimes it's drier.
The trucks that you bring the monopoles in on, what kind of a turning radius do they need?
There are various methods for getting the concrete poles around different radiuses, so we don't have a specified radius. They do have steerable trailers if there's a very tight radius that the trucks can use. They utilize this same kind of hauling technology for turbine blades, for wind turbine construction.
So I guess would it be possible to, Monique had sort of raised the issue of whether staff's estimate included matting along the entire length of the line. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's accurate.
Okay, great, thanks. So if there are matting along access roads as well? If there were,
All the roads would be matted. We're looking at the weight distribution of these trucks that you're bringing in, because these poles are weighing almost the full tonnage of the semi. And the fact that you have a great impact upon the area as you move along. These trucks are not just going to turn around every time they drop a pole. They're going to have to get out of there because they have very little turning radius.
Yeah, I don't think we anticipate the trailers being driven all the way down the line route, you know, the nearest access point, and then a different vehicle, smaller rig vehicle, not a full tractor trailer to actually get down the route. You can maybe explain how we did it previously.
We have pictures that we could show you of collapsible trailers that can go in rugged right-of-way. We note in our field visits and in the examination of aerial photography and Google Earth that there are numerous access points for these routes. And the right-of-way between Marcy and Pleasant Valley is owned in fee. So we see numerous access points. There are roads in many of the locations that the utility is used for maintenance or construction.
I'd like to also speak to your point about...
Slide it towards you.
Also, your point about the payload of the trucks. I think that the truck will carry their maximum over-road weight, regardless what they're carrying, whether it's steel poles or concrete poles. They're not going to underweight to deliver. So I think that is sort of a, I think the weight of the pole is not going to really dictate things. Can you guys say something, speak to that a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean,
If we were using steel poles, there'd be multiple poles on the truck. So yes, the trucks would be loaded up. And we've been able to successfully get concrete poles into various right-of-way, different soil conditions without any extreme measures, without significant improvements.
Yeah, that was the point of some of the pictures we provided, that it really is not that extensive or it doesn't take that much to get there.
But the pictures were in open terrain. Do you have is there a project somewhere in the Northeast that has similar environmental characteristics to the rights-of-way we're talking about, where something like this has already been done? I mean, you know, this is not Texas or something where you...
Yeah, but even in Texas, Texas has hills. I mean, there's an area actually called Hill Country, and that's where we primarily did a good segment of our Lone Star transmission project there a few years back. So I thought we did incorporate some of those into the pictures that were sent, but if not, we'll get them to you, because it's quite literally they are extremely hilly areas, a lot of gulches and valleys, and a lot of wooded terrain. We had to blast the top of a mountain off just to get a couple structures up to it. So we'll be happy to share that with you. But we managed to get all the concrete poles in. Let me also say that if we do come upon areas that are either, say, surrounded by wetlands, or it's going to be extremely difficult to get a concrete pole in there, then we will change the pole requirement out to a steel pole. We're not, we do that kind of stuff, but what we're saying is primarily it's a concrete pole structure that we're going to be using, but there may be instances where, once, we work with the environmental folks, if a determination is made, we'll definitely use a steel monopole structure in lieu of a concrete pole.
Is there a right-of-way in the Northeast that we could go look at that has similar poles already? Does anybody know?
Primarily concrete poles have not been used in the Northeast, and it's mainly because of where the facilities are that fabricate concrete poles. I mean, there's 6 facilities in the South, and it goes from California all the way over to Florida. We've utilized those facilities for all of our projects across the United States. we tend to use these structures where it makes the most sense. And we also tend to use them where the limitations of travel. Now, you're saying, yeah, we're way up here in the Northeast, but as we mentioned earlier, we've already worked with our vendor to determine a method for barging all these poles up here and then taking them off barge and bringing them to the facilities. So we're not concerned about actually getting them here. As far as, is there anybody that uses concrete monopoles? We can provide you a list. There are I think, some 138 kV lines. I think there's one potentially in LIPA's area. I know there's, the technology itself, whether the pole's being used in a transmission aspect or whether it's being used in a lighting, as a lighting, the technology's available all over the place up here. There's a plant in Canada, in Ontario, that fabricates spun concrete poles, but to this point we haven't purchased from them. But we can provide additional information if you all need it. The vendor has provided a list, and I thought we had submitted that list previously, and it may be in our March 2nd filing, of the various projects that they have provided poles to up north of, we'll call it the Mason-Dixon line.
Yeah, my concern has nothing to do with getting them from Florida to here. It was purely what you do with them when you get it here, and what kind of problems they have or haven't had installing them in a wooded right-of-way somewhere. So if you can identify a right-of-way that has poles like you're talking about somewhere in the Northeast that has similar terrain and trees and other things, I think some of us would probably like to go out and look at it.
So if I can ask us to go back to how we got here, which was the roads and the matting. So, that's obviously one of the areas where the staff's cost estimate was very different. Can we get a sense of what you assumed per mile for these projects? I know you gave us a range there a little while ago, but just so we can try to understand better what was and wasn't included and where we do actually disagree, if it's just a mile issue or if it's a cost per mile issue.
I don't have the per mile pricing at hand here, but for the matted access areas, you can definitely rely on the wetlands crossed, and then of course we put a buffer on there to consider other areas that may be needing matting along the route. As far as the access roads, it's a sum of actually the brush removal, the pulling sites, and access roads all together, so it's really a rolled up number. We can go back and provide you the per mile cost. I just don't have it.
I think that's important for us to understand, just so we can, like I said, so we can figure out if it's we think you'd need to do X miles versus we think it would cost twice as much per mile.
Right, but we also know there's existing roads in some areas. We've made assumptions that some of the existing roads may not need improvements if a pole's right next to a road. I think, we're the one on the hook for the number. I think we've, done some due diligence. We've done as much as we could from GIS and site visits where we could get to. We'll get you the per mile cost, I guess.
I guess just one comment about the matting. I guess there are two proposals out there. I guess Knickerbocker to Pleasant Valley, basically the same route right away, very similar in scope of work, but the matting costs that staff provided for our project versus Transco's project were very different, despite the projects being the same. And I think it was in the neighborhood of $30 million difference between the two projects, despite having similar scopes.
And
that was a question.
Your
Could you
Knickerbocker Pleasant Valley line, that's not where you're using concrete poles, is that right?
No, they all use concrete monopoles.
No, I thought your, well, what is your, I guess I'm thinking of the NAT people. They have the one with the triple structure. So all of you have concrete poles regardless, okay? And So you don't think there's any difference between using a concrete pole and a steel pole in terms of the need for roads or matting?
Actually, I would point out that steel poles actually have a concrete foundation. So they have to go in and dig the foundation, set the foundation, let it cure, and then come back and erect the pole, the steel pole. So I think the difference is that we come in once, whereas they have to come in twice, and they have concrete involved too, setting concrete. In terms of delivery,
Don't you have somebody drilling a hole or something?
yeah, but it's a bore. Can you speak to the installation techniques?
So, yes, you would haul the poles to the location. There would be a digger that would have to come and dig the hole, anywhere from 4.5 to 5 diameter, a foot diameter hole typically.
How deep would the hole be?
What?
How deep is the hole?
20 to 25 feet.
Okay, so you're talking about a
typically.
big piece of equipment then, right?
Right, and then there'd be a crane set up to set the pole in the hole, backfill with select aggregate. Then we would move on to the next location. The pole's framed on the ground before it's installed, and then the conductor crew would come back following the pole crew after they'd made significant progress and begin conductor pulling. So if there were foundations, there would have to be concrete trucks that come in there to, if say, for example, you got almost a 9-foot diameter foundation, which it appears some of the competitors have, you'd have 2, 3, 4 concrete trucks have to come in there for each hole to fill that hole. That's significant weight.
Just so you understand, some of the 345 structures that have been put in the state are direct embeds, vibratory, into the ground, and some of them have had holes, and they just get put in the hole, and gravel just backed around them. So it doesn't necessarily mean that Transco is producing a project with concrete trucks coming for every pole. So I just don't want any misnomers. We've looked at everybody, and we're trying to put everybody on the same basis. But I just don't want you running down the road here thinking.
No, I'm just going by their cross-section drawings that show the poles on foundations. That's what my assumption is based on.
So Ed, can you just, I think that the question that got us going was there a difference between the amount of matting and roads assumed for NextEra versus the TOs?
Yeah, there was, because of the weights that you were showing us, we added the matting because of the impacts and the fact that, when the utilities put up steel poles, they're sectionalized and they use smaller trucks to get them in. And here you've got big semis with a very heavy weight right away, and you're only delivering basically one pole.
So what was your weight assumption on the poles?
They're almost, whatever we could get, we're looking at maybe 60,000 pounds.
I think the typical pole would be probably 45,000 pounds.
Well, we tried to get what we could get, and you did not provide us a weight, so we went out and we got it off the internet and found that number.
Right. So I mean, I think it might be disagreement about the assumption just because it wasn't necessarily a piece of information that we had readily available. So I think that answers some of the difference, at least for the roads and the matting cost differences. Do you have anything else on that point, Ed? Okay.
Well, so is the answer then that matting was assumed for 100% of our lines, but then not an assumption for 100% of the Transco line?
We made no adjustments to Transco.
And also, was there 100% new road along our projects?
Yes.
Okay, so we built a new road and then we mat the road.
The weight, yes. Transco is going to have to build roads no matter what. I mean, every project will have to build roads. There is no way you're going to get out of not having to build a road to go down the right-of-way. And there's no way you're going to get out of having to place a culvert at every road crossing on either side of the road and putting them down rock and putting down other kinds of matting to prevent the rock from moving. That's all there, and everybody's got the cost.
Yeah, and I think that is included in our cost estimate. I guess it's just the degree of whether we build a road along the entire length and then mat that road the entire length.
Right. I think, and that's what I was trying to get at before, Monique, is if we can understand what the cost per mile assumption was, then we can figure out if it was just we think it's X miles and you think it's, X minus 25 miles, whatever it is.
It's a unit cost versus the length.
Correct.
Right, and I think I want to also stress there needs to be consistency between where projects are similar in scope, same right-of-way, 345 kV line. They should be treated very similar if you're going to generalize assumptions. So there should be consistency between how applicants are treated with respect to their cost estimates.
We just want to emphasize, we really believe that in areas where there's existing roads in certain areas that we can use as is. Crossing a ditch off a county road or something, we can do with a temporary bridging. We don't have to put permanent culverts in because we're going to do it temporarily during construction and be out of the way. So we definitely don't add extra costs for permanent roads everywhere, where we need to do it. It's just to get in, get our work done, and get out. Okay.
Yeah, it's less environmentally impactful as well, obviously.
Okay, and another area, I guess we'll move on off roads.
Actually, can we speak any more about our pole delivery and the trucks and that sort of thing? Can we say more about the trucks that deliver?
I don't know that there's much else to say. I mean, we can, if you still have a lack of confidence in it, then we can.
You got to speak into the microphone.
I'm not sure what else there is to say. If there's a lack of confidence in the ability to get the pole to the hole, then we'll be happy to, better explain that. We can bring the vendor in to talk to you about how that's done, because he's doing it all over the country, and primarily for us. I mean, I realize that you're looking for something in the Northeast. The biggest example, Florida Power and Light, a sister utility, they primarily use concrete poles. They've been using them since the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. This technology has been around for a while, so we're talking, say, 25 years of use in Florida. It's very wet in Florida. I'm sure everybody knows that. It rains there all the time in the summer. FPL does their construction year-round. They don't just wait till it's dry season. So we understand matting. We understand, wet conditions. We understand wetlands. Permitting requirements are significant in Florida when it comes to mitigating. So, Valmont has trailers for almost every application. And, if they're hauling these crossroads, when we haul them in Florida, they're being hauled from Bartow, Florida, which is roughly 3 hours west near Tampa. And those trucks distribute down to Naples. They distribute up to Duval. They distribute it to Miami. They're coming across county roads, city roads. They go off access. They go on right-of-ways. They go in wet right-of-ways. When they're done, the trailers can be collapsed, and then basically, you're not worrying about just trying to turn the whole thing around. It's the trailers collapse. They're accordion-type style. They reconnect, and they turn them around. They get them out of there. Or we find, we spend an awful lot of time with Valmont. They'll come out and actually do an assessment of every pole location. They'll look at the permitting requirements. They'll look at bridges. They'll look at, where they have height disadvantages, and they'll make a determination well in advance of how to get every pole to the hole. They'll also know what requirements they're going to have on the number of axles and the weight distribution. So, this is not, this is not a case where we haven't done this many, many times before. We're very confident that it can be done, although I can't show you an exact example up here in the Newland area at this time.
Yeah, so as environmentally impactful as well.
Okay, and another area, I guess we'll move on off roads. I don't know that there's much else to say. I mean, we can, if there's a lack of confidence in it, then we can. You got to speak into the microphone.
I
And just a final point on wetlands and agricultural districts. As you know, Florida is a lot of agriculture, and then it also has the Everglades. So we work in those environments quite a bit. So, and their regulations are just as stringent as New York. Let's wait until there's anything more.
No, I guess just you had made a statement that none of the Transco's estimates were modified, and I was just, could you just expound on that a little bit? What was the rationale for that? For modifying only for 3 of the developers, but not one of the others?
Part of it. I thought I heard today that as far as matting was concerned, that they were matting almost the whole right-of-way in most of the segments anyway. If you remember when we were having a discussion about how many miles were matted and not matted, it sounded to me like they were matting 80 to 90% of the right-of-way anyway. So what would you have done?
Okay.
Would you have added in the other 10%?
No, I guess I wasn't. Was that just with respect to matting, or was that a more generic statement?
I'm just talking about matting right now.
Right, but I just wasn't sure of the previous statement.
If Ed put in the 100% matting for you guys and the TOs had 90% matting, sure, that difference could be fixed.
Right. So, I mean, in terms of some of that rationale, it was included more in the environmental section of the interim report. The TOs, for better or for worse, however you want to put it, provided more information about the rights of way, so staff had more confidence that if it was like a 5% difference, that their 5% difference was more accurate because they have the additional information about the rights of way that not all the other applicants had. So if that's the concern, that not everyone was being treated evenly, it was it was a judgment call on behalf of staff that there was no adjustment necessary there because it looked exactly like what we would have expected.
Okay, and so are we talking generically, or are we just talking about the matting issue, or?
So the only adjustments that were made to anyone else's cost estimates were matting roads and for you guys labor. There were no other adjustments made to anyone's. So those are sort of the issues that ended up coming up through last week's technical conferences. And I mean, I think we've been through now labor because you've got that in here, roads and matting. So the last issue is the construction management.
So did staff make a construction management adjustment?
Yeah.
Yes, we did.
Okay, so what was that for?
Yes, we did. Well, we made a construction management on the throughway alternative that they had, because they're going to be at the edge of the right-of-way of the throughway, which the throughway has stringent requirements for traffic control.
Is that the only project where there was construction management?
Well, no, but I would just want them to understand, but if you go down the throughway right now, you'll see the types of traffic control they got running right now going westbound.
Yeah, so I mean, I can run through very quickly here the different segments. There were notes that were explained in the spreadsheets that we sent out, but by and large, the rationale was inspectors and monitors for environmental and agriculture, engineers, and then, as Ed said, some extra costs for the throughway. So, when we were, you asked some questions about Transco. When we looked at their estimates, those $1 million-ish roundabout estimates were what we would have expected. So when I didn't see those in the NextEra cost information, that's what was added in.
Okay, so I'm looking at NextEra's document, and they have a category called Job Management and Development. So what else is in there besides these inspectors?
For the E&C portion, I mean, it's our direct supervision of our contractors. We've got people, monitoring their work, but they're also doing SWIP inspections as they're out there. So they're not all independent full-time equivalents for every role. It's a combination. You know, one thing to emphasize is that we either use our internal resources or we direct hire a contractor. We don't go through an engineering firm who then directs, subcontracts out and adds adders on. So we keep our costs low by directly hiring and using internal resources for all these roles. So our safety inspectors, quality inspectors are all direct hired by us.
Is there a reason why you couldn't have broken that out?
The development construction management runs through all of those. We rolled it up. But as you see, it's several $1 million, so it covers all of those various categories.
All right, but is there a reason why you couldn't break it out?
We can, if you want.
If you could.
Yeah, if you're looking for kind of a breakdown, typically what we'll have is an overall construction manager. That construction manager will have a transmission superintendent and a substation superintendent, who in turn, let's say we had multiple substation projects going on, would have a supervisor at each of those locations. He's going to have one full-time safety supervisor who, depending on how much work, where the crews are, how remote they are, might have multiple safety inspectors below that are out trying to, monitor the jobs on a daily basis. You also have your environmental inspectors that are going to be out there. If we had very strict requirements dictated by some environmental requirement, say, we've done a lot of work in California, and there's always a desert tortoise issue out there. So we literally have to have an inspector who's following trucks as they're driving down right-of-ways. If we have an issue like that up in New England, we'll have the same support staff that's there. Any type of, again, SWIP inspections that are being done to make sure that hay bales are properly in place, and if you've had a rain event, that there's people out there that are constantly making sure that the turbidity screens are back up again and you have hay bales in place. So he'll have typically, on a project of this size and scale, he'll have 6 or 7 full-time people who are supporting him. And then there may be additional inspectors that we bring in. Again, if we end up wanting to have some compliance work, we're verifying pull set depths, all those things, then you'll have support people that are working with the contractor, bringing the information in daily. So, generally, as we note here, the number of people, you can count on there being usually 6 to 7 full-time people out there, and then some part-time construction people that are brought in generally later in the game when the project's really heated up and there's a lot of work going on.
Yeah, and to add to that, the environmental compliance inspector, we got those estimates from our environmental consultants.
Okay, so if you can get us a breakdown, that would be helpful. Have anything else?
Do we want to go through the labor again? I know we went that in some summary form, but on the bottom of the footnotes, we talk about labor. There's a range. And do you want to go through our theory on estimating labor?
Well, we provided the new.
No, we didn't do that.
Oh, we didn't send it?
Just did this, the footnote.
Just to reemphasize, we recategorize our material and labor. We went back into that, and the range is much closer to 2.3 to 2.5, based on our estimates. I mean, you can see the breakdown here. You can recalculate them, I guess, if you wanted to your categories.
And again, this
If
is
you've already done the
gra-
calculation, why don't you just provide it to them?
Yeah, I mean, we can send it over, right?
yeah.
That spreadsheet that I gave you? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And again, it's a bottom-up estimate. It's not just in buckets. So I think you can go into some detail on that.
Yeah, and I guess I can emphasize, we, unlike the Transco, we do the estimates in-house. We don't just go to a third-party engineer. We're the ones that actually contract the work and direct hire these contractors, and we talk to them regularly. we use our engineer to scope the project and define, quantities, poles, counts, line length, and all that to use for our estimate. But, internally, our own estimators in-house do the true estimate. That's why we think it's solid and we can stand behind it. I can't say Burns and Mac necessarily would be hiring contractors directly. So.
And are your labor numbers going to reflect local union rates?
Absolutely. Discuss with contractors, use RS means, productivity adjustments, benefits and burdens on labor, different skill sets, different craft for different tasks.
Anything else that you need from them?
I'll note that the information that we sent in did not yet include Oakdale Fraser. Like Transco, we'll probably follow up with that. It does then sort of, just mentioning the Oakdale Fraser, obviously it's relevant to the cost discussion, the conflating of the Oakdale Fraser and the Marcy to Edict projects. I know we raised this at the previous technical conference, and we raised it in a July 14th letter, and we appreciate that staff's still considering that issue, but I will note that it's now been approximately 3 weeks since we pointed out the error in our July 14th letter, and we still haven't heard any specific rationale at all for why that erroneous conflating took place, like a reference to some piece of text from one of our submissions or anything. So, sorry, did you guys hear what I was saying? Okay. The point is just that we still haven't I appreciate that the conflating of Oakdale Fraser and Marcy Edict Pleasant Valley is still under consideration by staff. I'm just noting that we still haven't, like approximately 3 weeks out, had any explanation or just a reference to a specific piece of text or anything in any of our submissions that would in any way support that erroneous conflation. And so I'm just re-raising that point. Obviously, it's important to us. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but it's something that we're very much focused on.
Okay.
Right.
Is it your belief that Oakdale Fraser makes any sense by itself in terms of trying to solve the problem of Upney-Sini?
We were specific in our application as to what we thought the benefits were associated with that project. So we did identify that it would not address the Central East or Upney-Sini, but it would have renewable impacts. And so we outlined that specifically in our application.
Okay, so I think when people looked at your application, it didn't make any sense to anybody that Oakdale Fraser was a standalone project. It seemed to be that you were proposing these other projects in the Hudson Valley with Oakdale Fraser as an adder that you apparently thought was something that would increase the overall benefits of the portfolio. And so I think that's where the confusion lies.
Sure.
But the staff will take in everything you've said, and they will address it in their report. They've said they will do that. They haven't made a decision as to what they're going to do yet, and they're not going to until they issue the final report.
Okay, yeah, and I think one of the purposes of the technical conference was obviously to have an exchange of ideas and to come, to hopefully reach consensus on some of these things. So I think this is good, because this is honestly, I think, probably the first time that I've heard even that much rationale for why they were combined. And just to sort of, in the interest of dialogue on the subject.
Well, I did say previously, though, that everybody who looked at the application had that same exact feeling when they read it, that Oakdale Fraser was intended to be part of every other project.
Right, but
So I don't know how it was stated in the application, but many different professionals got the same impression reading the same document.
Right, I'm not sure
individually.
there's a specific line or anything like that we can point to. It was when trial staff read it, when advisory staff read it, when the ISO helped helped us go through the process. That's what everyone assumed based on what was in the applications. So
Everybody came to the same exact conclusion, so.
I guess one of the reasons why we included Oakdale Fraser as a standalone project was Commission did include in one of their goals was not only just, I guess, increase on the UPNI and Central East interfaces, but also enabling renewables, new renewable resources as well. And so that was the stated goal of the Oakdale Fraser project. So it was always meant to be a standalone project with a different goal focused on renewables and not so much on the UPNI Central East interface issue.
Yeah, and I mean, we now understand where you guys stand on that, and we're in the middle of looking at all the issues and trying to come to a decision. As Paul said, it'll be in the final report.
And we can certainly provide you more information on the genesis of the Oakdale project too, and where that it was formed from. Sure.
But you are going to give a template with numbers for that, is that right?
For Oakdale?
Yeah. Either that or are you still pursuing Oakdale Fraser at this point? It's not up to me to decide. It's up to you to decide.
Well,
if you still want them on the table, then give us the numbers.
Well, it depends how it's.
I guess if the renewables aspect of the Oakdale Fraser isn't valued in this proceeding, then I guess
the benefit cost analysis will take into account renewables from upstate as one of the things in the mix of the benefit cost analysis. Assuming the project survives to that part, but anyway,
we'll get back to you on that.
Provide the numbers anyway, because we may need it just to parse out what we have.
We'll get back to you on that, actually.
And then I guess some procedural questions that relate to staff's cost estimate versus the binding bid. For the purposes of the 80-20 risk-sharing mechanism, the binding bids submitted by the developers remain operative, right, regardless of staff's cost estimates?
So, I mean, I've said this a number of times. I can't speak for the commission. I don't know what they'll end up deciding to do in any decision. But from the perspective of trial staff,
well, that's right. And I've also said that we don't know what staff's going to do. If staff thinks that, for instance, you're way off on your matting and that the commission's going to impose matting costs on you that you haven't included, staff may say, fine, you have your binding bid, but 80% of that additional matting cost is going to have to be paid for by the ratepayers under the risk-sharing proposal that the commission has proposed.
Right.
Now, you've proposed your own proposal, but that's not what the commission said was going to be the rules. And so then you have to take all that information and decide what to do with it.
Right. Trial staff fully intends to present both the applicant's original cost estimate in addition to whatever else we think would need to be considered by the commission in making its decision. So, I think that's as far as I can go at this point.
Okay. So then it sounds like what I'm hearing, though, is that any difference between trial staff's cost estimate and the bids binding bids by 3 of the developers and something else by Transco, the delta between those two figures would be run through the 80-20 risk-sharing mechanism in deriving a projected cost of the project for any further analyses, in terms of production cost modeling as well.
That's a possible way to do it. They may also run 100% of the cost through, because FERC hasn't said they're going to adopt the 80-20 sharing. So, the commission needs to know all that information. So you're going to have, you got the applicant's cost, you got the applicant costs if it gets inflated by staff at sharing, and then you got it without sharing. And somewhere in there is going to be where it ends up. So staff is going to give a full, recommendation to the commission as here's all the different factors out there, and then staff is somehow going to make a recommendation as to what to do.
Right.
Okay. Thanks.
You guys have anything else?
No. Is there anything else?
Okay, so there's a number of things that you're going to provide to the staff as a result of this conversation. This is the opportunity for people in the audience to ask questions. If you have a question, please come up to one of the microphones.
Good morning. This is Dan Duthie, and just to make sure everybody's clear, I'm representing 7 out of the 18 members of the Hudson Valley Smart Energy Coalition. I just wanted to ask a question about the binding cost estimate. Would your cost estimate change if that binding obligation was removed? In other words, you would just have a cost estimate, but it wouldn't be a binding cost estimate.
I don't think we're able to answer that right now. We can, we have to consult with management on that before we can really say that.
Okay, I have no other questions.
What do you mean by removed? I mean, I think we offered it, right?
Well, what I'm right now is I understand the binding cost estimate. If the developer comes in and says it's going to cost $10 million, okay, then that's what the cost is that the developer will incur. Anything less than that, he would get a benefit. Anything more than that, she would suffer a detriment with the ratepayers picking up 80% of the overage. That's all I'm saying is that if we were to take that part of it out, if it was just a good faith cost estimate, how would that affect that cost estimate? Since it would seem to me that if I'm putting in a binding cost estimate, I would look very carefully at how I'm putting that estimate together, and I'd probably have a significant contingency in there if I knew I was going to get stuck at some point in time with perhaps cost overruns. And so it would seem to me that if I removed that cost estimate, the binding nature of the cost estimate, I would probably put in a lower cost estimate. But if you can't answer it, that's fine.
Yeah, your approach is correct, but I can't speak to that specifically right now.
Okay.
Matt Brower from Ag and Markets again. I guess I have a couple comments than questions. I'm looking at the photos and seeing pickup trucks, bulldozers, cranes, the delivery trucks for the poles. That's a fair amount of traffic across an ag field. If it was the field closest to the road, it might be limited traffic, but the way our fields are laid out here, you have to go through several fields to get to the last one. That would be a number of structures that would be going across that field as you're working your way back out. You mentioned construction in spring and fall, which from a soil moisture condition is the worst time of year here. If you take this past June, seemed like it rained every day here. So without matting, you probably would be shut down the whole month. So I think there's a lot more to it. I don't know how the other states regulate or protect their farmland, but we're pretty protective here. I don't know what the topsoil depths are in Florida, but our topsoil here is relatively shallow, so the impacts are greater. So I just think that there's a lot more to the protection of the agricultural resources here, and I think there's a lot more to our soil moisture conditions and damage and so on. The restoration would be extremely expensive should that damage occur. So that's why the matting is important in agricultural areas.
Thank you. Anybody else have any questions?
Rich Allen with National Grid. Just a few questions here, and the first one is for you, Ed. As far as the Knickerbocker to PV option, was the scope of work from between Knickerbocker and Greenbush included with your evaluation on NextEra's cost estimate or not?
The Greenbush to Knickerbocker section.
Yep. Right, yeah.
I believe that was assumed that that would be rebuilt in any event, and it was not included in the cost estimate.
Right. So this was an inconsistency we uncovered last week that obviously hasn't been corrected because we haven't issued anything. But that segment was included in the ISO's analysis, but was not included in staff's cost or environmental analysis. So it's something that we know we have to look at and make sure is included in the 19A scenario.
I'll comment to that. I guess you guys did account for that because you guys included 62 miles of, I guess, matting for our project.
So, like I said, we know there are inconsistencies, so we are going to go back and take a look at that.
Okay, thank you. Second question here. I know one of the gentlemen down here stated about the construction of the concrete poles, the benefit you were going to come in once, build it, and get out. Just when you've got a line that you're actually going to be getting in, removing structures, potentially building temporary workarounds, and then doing an installation, could you clarify how you would do that by getting in and out once? Or is that more of a, I'll let you answer.
Can you explain that scenario again?
I'm sorry, someone whispered in my ear, I didn't hear your question.
Can you explain that scenario again?
Yeah, so Knickerbocker to PV, we're going to be going, there's going to be a retirement of the 115 structures. And there's also going to need to be some temporary workarounds to ensure that service is maintained to the existing customers. The assumption, it sounds like, that was made was that there's going to be a one-in, one-out access to the right-of-way at the various points for the new poles. But it doesn't seem to take into account the removals, the access for removals and access for temporary workarounds.
Well, I think that statement was geared around just the installation of the structure, because if you have a foundation, you're going to have to get in and install the foundation. Then you've got to come back in after the foundations have concrete's cured, set the poles on the foundations. So in our case, we're doing that pole installation in one sequence of events where you deliver the pole, drill the pole, set the pole, move to the next location.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but you would have to get in more than once then for removals and stuff.
Right.
Okay. So, next question is related to the concrete pole installation. You drill your holes, you bring the poles in, and then you backfill it. What kind of backfill material do you use?
Select aggregate.
And so you'll bring that, how do you bring that into the site?
With a, like a
dump truck?
A dump truck, or, and then you have a backhoe to.
Okay, so that, and a dump truck loaded with aggregate was probably arguably weighting about the same weight as a concrete truck?
I don't think we're talking about the same kind of dump truck.
Okay. I noticed, next question, I noticed in the estimate that there's no line items for temporary workarounds. Where is that in the estimate? I didn't see that in there.
Are you talking about the segmentation of the 115 kV lines, temporary?
Yeah, somehow there's, there was mention as far as, for example, in your application, you're going to be installing molly pops and maybe other, maybe temporary poles are going to need to get in there. I just don't see any, I don't see where those costs are in here. It's just looking to see where you've included them.
We'll have to get back to you on that.
Okay, thank you. And my last question is related to the HDD estimate. There's a line item in here for roughly $6 million or a little over $6 million. Could you explain what that covers?
That's first.
Scenario 17.
Scenario 17, it's
Yeah, that's under,
6.3 million.
I think there's river crossings and things like that.
Yeah, speaking to the mic.
That's the boring itself.
Okay, that's the boring itself. Where can we find the cost then? Presumably you're going to need transition stations to go from overhead to underground. Where would those costs be found?
Portion of it's in the structure cost, and part of it's in the line construction cost.
It's all in the line construction?
The labor work and the materials are up in the structure cost.
Okay. And presumably the cables for that crossing and so on are all within the line materials and line construction?
The materials up on the top along with the conductor, and then labor's down in the labor and equipment.
Okay. And approximately, what's the size of your transition stations? There was nothing provided in the applications that provided any guidances or drawings. What size are those transition stations?
I think in the estimate, we assumed a transition structure, but that decision hasn't been made about how that transition would ultimately be. That's how it was covered in the estimate. So if it was a station, it would be, it would not be a very big area, 50 square feet, something on that order.
Okay, thank you.
Just want to follow up with you on the transition station. So are you talking about putting lightning arresters in there to protect the cable and the switches and grounding devices? Yes. Can't hear you.
Yeah, not switches. We're going to go directly from overhead to underground, so you will have arresters protecting both sides of the cable crossing itself.
Okay, but so you're going to have grounding devices in there?
Yes.
In order to do this? Okay, and how close to the river do you expect to be? Are you expected to be in the floodplain or out of the floodplain, the 500-year floodplain?
Our preliminary assessment would be out of the floodplain areas.
Which floodplain?
The 500-year. I should correction. In the Poughkeepsie case, we've met with the city, and they've directed us to a city park area, and that is in the floodplain for the throughway route.
Anything else?
Okay. My name is Jim Bunyan. I'm with Nashville Grid. My first question is of your planning engineer. One, Transco National Grid submitted their 6 alternatives. We had significant discussion with the Transmission Control Center and/or the ISO about reliability issues, about the ability to take lines in and out of service, and would it be licensable, permittable. When we considered our original proposal that we had a crossing of the Hudson River, and we eliminated that. We took that out because of the recognized need to take the Alpha number 2 line down, and that short window that line would have to be out of service. And the red flag that was identified was the impact to ISO New England. So I'm talking about the New York-New England interface. Every one of the projects that we have is going to impact that interface. But then the question was asked, is there, from a reliability standpoint, will that be issued and granted? My question of your planning engineer is that 20 miles of length that you're taking out and rebuilding, for that period of time, have you considered the potential circuit breaker that may exist with the potential impact to that interface relative to reliability?
So we're only talking about, I guess, Marcy South 2?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so that would be the only one that would be taking out the 20-mile
That's
section
correct.
rebuild. So none of the other projects have any existing rebuilds or concerns with outages of existing lines.
I understand that.
Okay.
So it's my question, when you proposed the Marcy South 2, did you consider that?
I guess we have not, I guess, have had discussions with NYSO in terms of operating, whether that's operable or outages around the projects, whether they're permissible or not. So I don't think NISO would know 4 years in advance right now, 3 years in advance, what they can take in or out at this time.
Okay. My next question is, am I correct in understanding the concrete poles that we have, that all of your concrete poles will require guying with the exception of tangent structures? Is that a correct understanding on my part?
The tangent structures are unguyed. The heavy angle and dead end structures would be guyed.
What about light angle?
What light angle depends on the angle. What up to probably 8 degrees we could have a self-supported pole.
Okay, so when you were talking about the one pass in and out, I assume you would be accomplishing all the guying that you would need. And when you consider that the guying, you also recognize the potential impact on the agricultural areas that guying causes.
Right, but we didn't assume that all structures would be guyed either.
My next question is, and I'm trying to understand the alternatives, am I correct in understanding that the projects that you have that tie into Con Ed's Pleasant Valley substation, am I correct in understanding that some of your alternatives you may be coming in from the west, and some of your alternatives you may be coming in from the east? Is that a correct understanding on my part?
I guess the throughway, I think, would be coming in from the west, and most of the other projects would be coming in from the north.
So you'd be coming in on the spare breaker positions on the east side of the station. So I'm interested in understanding how you're going to get to that spare breaker position.
Right, so I think in our interconnection diagrams, and I think in discussions that we've had with Con Ed and with NISO through the interconnection process, is that they would re-terminate their Long Mountain line to the spare position, and that would open up a position for us to bring our line in into the north side of the substation.
That's on the projects on the east. How are you going to get in, connect in to the west? Are you physically going to, did you have discussions with, you could have to extend you could have to extend the fence line. And have you confirmed that whether Con Ed owns the property to extend that fence line? If you don't extend the fence line, you could have to cross the 91, 92 line, which you're not going to do. And if you come in from the west, you're going to have to swap the positions, several line positions, and have you confirmed with Con Ed they're willingness to do that? Because when I talked to them, they would not.
When you're saying swap positions, are you talking about the Long Mountain line, or are you talking about something else?
Now I talk about when you're coming in from the west, you got to get the spare breaker position to the east. In order to get the spare position to the east, you have to move the 92 over, you have to move the 91 over. As a utility, Con Ed is not willing to do that. So my question of you is, on your proposal that came in on the west,
Right, so
how are you going to connect to that substation?
So to be specific, you're talking about the throughway proposal, right,
Mhm.
which is the only one coming in from the west. I guess in terms, we haven't had discussions with Con Ed in terms of, crossing their lines to get to the middle of the right-of-way, and then coming into the north into that Long Mountain, the existing Long Mountain position. So the proposed interconnection for the west is going to have, I guess, the Pleasant Valley substation is going to look the same whether it's coming in from the west or coming in from the north. They're going to re-terminate their Long Mountain line to the east, the open position that's open today. That will open up a position for us to terminate our line.
Coming in from the west, in order to do that, you're either going to have to cross the 91, 92, or you're going to have to move to 91, 92. They would not allow me to consider that, and I'm just pointing that out to you.
Right.
We're also considering an undergrounding approach to Pleasant Valley. But I think
Okay.
a lot of this detail will be worked out in SIRS.
That's correct.
Is
I
that
think-
correct?
Well, I guess that's true. The throughway, I forgot. We were undergrounding, I think,
That's an option.
oh, okay.
But I do believe some of this detail, all of this detail will be worked out in the SIRS. Is that correct?
You got to face the mic when you're talking.
Oh, he's not answering.
Okay, the projects that include the Princetown substation, Do you have an option on that property, or have you identified a willing property owner to sell the property that you will need for the Princetown substation?
No, we felt that was premature at this point.
I eliminated that because in order to be able to make the statement that I could deliver this without requiring additional right-of-way, we identified several sites that we felt would work. We had discussion with the property owners, and they were adamant that they would not sell. So to build Princetown, I would need condemnation.
Well, perhaps your approach to property acquisition differs from our approach to property acquisition, so I think we'll reserve judgment on whether we can acquire that property or not.
Okay. My next question is the 3031 line. You're going to that 66 miles that you're going to build from the Edict to the Princetown Junction. When we sat with the TCC and with the Transmission Control Center, and we looked at the shoulder period and windows that would be available, we needed that full year of time, the period in the spring and the period in the fall, to be able to take the 31 out of service first, to build the 345 connection into Rotterdam, and then we would follow up the following spring to do the 30 line. We needed every bit of that 3 months shoulder period that existed on both ends. Now you're building something that is 6 times longer in length. Does your schedule reflect the shoulder period, the period of time that you're going to need, or are you going to come up with 6 different contractors to be able to do that within that 1 year time? Has your schedule reflected that and recognized that?
I think we would have to look at the details of the schedule before we could answer that question. Unless, can you respond generally?
I guess I'm not sure I understand the question when you say we're building something 6 times in length. I guess, what are you referring to?
5 miles from Princetown to Rotterdam, 5 miles from the other line, Princetown to Rotterdam, that's 10 circuit miles. You have 66 circuit miles, 6 times the length. Understanding the construction sequence, looking at how that would be done, looking at the shoulder period that was available to us from a reliability standpoint, I needed all of the spring and all of the fall to build that 10 miles. You're building 66 miles. So when you considered this and had discussion and looked at the window that you had available to you, did your schedule reflect the work that needed to be done in that window that was available to you?
I guess, aren't you guys also building 66 miles as well? I mean, you're going from Edict to Rotterdam as well, so it's not just the 10 miles.
We're different. You're taking one line down and you're putting Rotterdam on one other line. From a reliability standpoint, you're not going to get that the entire year. That will not happen. We are looping the 14 line in and out. We are supplying Rotterdam from Edict. We're supplying Rotterdam from New Scotland. Rotterdam has 2 sources that Rotterdam has today from the 3031 line. You take that one line out of service, and now you're putting Rotterdam on one supply. You're not going to get that. There is a limited period that you're going to have for that. My question of you, did your schedule recognize that?
I guess, I mean, we haven't had discussions with NYSO in terms of what outage capabilities we can take now. Those, I guess, discussions are premature until we actually win a project and actually schedule around in terms of what's actually there. 3 years from now, you might be able to take that outage because there's new transmission facilities, new generator facilities, different load. I guess you don't know that. You can't take it out 3 years from now, 2 years from now, whenever you start construction.
Okay, thank you. That's all I had. Dave Boris has some questions for you.
Again, I'm David Burris with Burns McDonnell. First, I want to make a point of clarification about the statement made about engineers estimating. So Burns McDonnell does a lot of work, EPC work, as you know. And also, the program management that we've been doing in the Northeast has all been full service. We've been providing full service from permitting to project closeout, including construction management for our clients and all of our projects. So this isn't just an engineer's estimate. This is based on our experience on $4 to $5 billion worth of construction in the Northeast, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maine, Connecticut, et cetera, et cetera. So I just want to make that clarification, okay? So I just have a few questions about your estimate. I'm looking at scenario 19, Knickerbocker PV only, the one that you submitted this morning. I don't see a subtotal there for direct cost, transmission line name. But if I add those three up above it, I would assume that would be the subtotal, so about $87 million. Is that correct? Well, this is the printout I was provided. Does it look like yours?
Yeah, just give us a chance to find where you're talking about on the
Yeah, I'm sorry.
piece of paper. So you're in the right column, which is scenario 19. And how
Correct.
far down the column are you?
Three groupings, and then it says subtotal direct cost, transmission line name, and I don't see a subtotal. I see three subtotals that I would assume add up to that. Direct labor, material, and equipment cost, transmission line, bottom, there should be a subtotal. So I would add 20 million, 58 million, 8 million to come up with 87.3 million.
Sounds about right.
Is that about correct?
Okay.
Okay, so does that match what you submitted earlier? Your application for the same project, Knickerbocker project, where you have transmission line, materials and labor, 40.2 million, 47.1 million, totaling 87.3 million? Was that intentional?
I mean, with the exception of the indirects down below, I mean, I'm not looking at, I don't have a spreadsheet.
I'm looking at
here.
direct costs only, so they were both direct costs.
So what's the point? I'm confused.
Was that-
They should add up to the numbers we submitted before. If they don't, then there's a mistake.
No, but I'm just clarifying, the intent was, your bottom line number hasn't changed.
No, that's correct.
Correct, that's correct.
And so these are direct costs for that transmission line from Knickerbocker to PV. They both equal 87.3 million. That's what I'm asking. Okay?
Okay.
Subject to check.
Okay, so then before you just had material and labor only, now you've added access roads and you've pulled it apparently out of your material and labor. $8 million. Right?
Yeah, we only had two line items, yes.
Yeah, before you had two, now you have three. So your direct for your materials was $40 million. And now it's $20 million. Is that correct? For transmission work?
I didn't hear that. Repeat that.
Your original estimate for your materials for transmission was $40.2 million. That's what you submitted previously.
Correct.
And now you're down to $20 million. You've reduced it by $20 million.
We didn't reduce or change. We just recalculated the ratio and the subcells.
Move some money around. You had two line items, now you have three.
Okay.
So you pulled the access roads out of your construction costs from your original estimate. That's all it appears that you've done.
Okay.
Okay. So then on your labor cost, which was $47.1 million, is now $58 million. It's gone up a little bit. And it looks like you stuck the removal and demolition in there of $23 million this time?
I don't think so, no.
It says, it's right here. $23 million removals and demolition under labor and equipment.
That wasn't in, that was a different line item on the original estimate.
Yeah, I agree. But now it's in your price?
No, it's not.
No, it's not.
Well, I'm looking at it, it's in your price. 3, 5, 26, 23, that equals $58 million.
Yeah, I guess we have a comment in there saying that it's not part of the binding price, but it's in there for apples to
I see that at the
apples.
bottom, but these numbers add up to $87.3 million. But you've added another $23 million number, and it still adds up to $87.3 million. Does it not?
Are you talking about the March 2nd application?
I'm comparing March 2nd.
Right, so the March 2nd application in those materials and labor numbers had escalation and contingency baked into them. They've now been reclassified in this template to remove escalation and contingency. They're now down below you now have, I guess, so you no longer have escalation contingency in these material and labor numbers at the top.
All right, let me jump in here. You were given a template and asked to reorganize your costs so that it matched the template, okay? So generally, you're saying your bottom line number is the same as it always was?
Exactly.
Okay, is there anything that's been added?
No, we've classified things that were binding based on our March 2nd application,
Mhm.
and then we've had the other, interconnection, removal of facilities that weren't binding in our application.
Right, 'cause-
But they are in this template, and we've
Okay,
subtotaled them
so that should be the
differently.
only difference then,
Correct.
when you get down to the bottom, the number at the bottom. Okay, is that,
So that's
is
just
there
a
something different that you're trying to get at?
Yeah, I was just trying to get to what their new material price and labor price. So we're going to look at this a bit closer. We just got it this morning, obviously.
Yeah, I mean-
So I was just curious to how you added $23 million to your line cost, but still came up with $87.3 million, coincidentally exactly the same as you submitted in March.
Well, the intent was for the number to be exactly the same as we submitted in March. We didn't add, we went back to our detail estimators and asked them to reclassify labor and materials.
Mm-hmm. I understand.
And that's all they did.
But you moved a $23 million below the line to above the line.
That's not correct.
Okay. Okay, so given that, well, we'll do some more comparisons and analysis and reserve the right to ask more questions later. That's all I have.
I just have a couple of quick questions. So you said you don't know the exact turning radius for the trailers, but I mean, how long are the concrete poles?
I believe the typical poles are 115, 120 foot long.
Okay, so they're, and what's the longest?
I think the longest poles are 130 foot.
Okay, so it'd be about 30 foot below ground, 100 foot above ground, or
No, I think I said 20 to 25 feet.
20 to 25. Okay, and the trailer has to at least be able to navigate something that long along the road, right?
I believe I explained that if there were a turning radius issue, that there are trailers that are steerable.
But it's a steerable trailer, but it's still steering something that's 115 to 130 feet long.
We can provide some drawings later that show turning radiuses if that's helpful.
Well, and your weight, you said 45,000 pounds. It strikes us as a little bit low. What's the typical and the highest weight for a concrete pole that's 115 to 130 feet long?
Well, I think like any pole, the length and the capacity of the pole is going to dictate the weight. So I was giving typical weights.
Well, but a steel pole is in sections, right? A concrete pole has to be a single piece, right? So a steel pole in multiple sections could be much lighter.
It doesn't
brought
have
in.
to be one piece. You can have two-piece concrete poles.
Okay. Are you proposing any of those here?
No.
Okay. Thanks.
Anybody else? Okay. Is there any other procedural matters or questions about next steps that anybody has before we conclude for the day? Boundless still owes us some information. We're going to try to communicate by email with all the parties included to try to get to the bottom of their numbers. Some of the other applicants have some takeaway things they have to provide. Please provide them by email to everybody on the service list. Okay. Okay, anything else? You guys have anything else? All right, well, thank you very much, everyone. We're done and concluded for today. Thank you.